Hello, friends. Sorry I can't be there with you today. Mikey, my 2.5-year-old, is sick, so I am home taking care of him. But I didn't want us to fall behind, so I want to make sure that we still cover the French Revolution today. You should have just watched John Green's crash course, and hopefully you were thinking through as you're watching it, what led to it, what are the causes, what was it like, the course of it, and what are the effects. And so I'm going to go into that a little bit more in detail with you and help you get some clear notes on that. So be ready to type away. I'm going to share a keynote with you right now. And here we go. All right. So we're going to look first at the long-term causes. Whenever you're thinking causes and effects, you should instantly think spice, and maybe even write that out. So we're going to look at some spice effect or spice causes first. So some social causes, the first big one. If you write social, okay, the social structure, and there actually was a name for it in France. It was the old regime. If I could speak French, I would. The ancien regime. I don't know. You could just call it the old regime, if you can remember that. And so that's just how society was set up in France at that time. And so there were 3 estates, and the third estate made up 97% of the population. And that included peasants. So I think that was like 80% of the country was peasants. And then the urban poor. And then people who were not poor, like the bourgeoisie, but they were called new money, meaning their parents were not wealthy and their grandparents were not wealthy. So they were not a part of the nobility. So even though they had money, they were not, they weren't old money. And so they didn't have that same status. And they are going to be the driving force behind the revolution. People who are poor tend to focus on just staying alive rather than leading these big revolutions. And so it's going to be this bourgeoisie class who really drives it. These are where the Enlightenment thinkers are coming from. And so then the other estates, who they are, you can remember the first estate, God first, is the clergy. And so the church had a ton of power. So speaking specifically about the Roman Catholic Church, they had a ton of power, ton of land, and a ton of money. They're super wealthy, and they were not taxed. Same thing with the second estate. These are the nobility, this is the nobles, and they too had little to no taxes. So you can see that political cartoon there, where the person who is in bondage was not literally a slave, but it felt like it, because this system, serfdom, is unofficially still in place. And he's carrying the country. And so there you see King Louis carrying a whip. You see the clergy with the big funny hat, and then you see the nobility. So they're all riding on his back. Meanwhile, he's suffering. All right, so that's the first cause. Next is P and spice. So the political struggles, there's a ton of them. If you look at how King Louis and Marie Antoinette are dressed, so they had this enormous wealth. Think of the Palace of Versailles. So this King Louis was not the one who built the Palace of Versailles. It was his grandfather. But so he inherited all this debt from the Palace of Versailles, but then also from just previous kings. And he was very inexperienced, and so kind of a weak king. And so he couldn't get out of that debt. And then you've got Marie Antoinette, who is from Austria. And so she's this foreign queen, so people didn't support her. And then they called her actually Madame Deficit. Deficit means debt, because she spent so much money on these elaborate hairdos and elaborate parties and clothes. Yeah, partly because she did not have a great marriage and was in a different country. Yeah, but people, and that's where that famous line, "Let them eat cake," that she probably didn't actually say, comes from, is from her. Another political struggle is the fact that the French actually help the Americans in the American Revolution. If you've seen Hamilton, you know that. And they saw that revolution could work. They saw it at play there. Okay, interaction with environment. This one is actually really huge. Kind of long-term, Little Ice Age. If you want to write that one down, I didn't put that in the keynote, but the Little Ice Age had been leading to lower and lower crop yields. And then when it really, things get real bad is in 1788 and 1789, when there's really harsh winters. So there's very bad harvests. So you don't have as much food, which means bread costs even more, which means people aren't able to feed their families. And when there's famine like that, that's when there's going to be revolts, when peasants can't even feed their families. So that's in 1789. So that's interaction with environment. Culturally, not really any cultural causes, but economic for sure, massive ones. There's a huge debt, which is made even worse by the American Revolution. So they're helping fight this foreign war and that they couldn't pay for. We got Marie Antoinette and her spending, but really the tax system that was super inefficient, where you don't have the wealthy people paying taxes, or the wealthiest. It says there on the little slide that by 89, France was bankrupt. They had borrowed money. And then you can see the tax system needed to change. The church and the nobles resisted it. They didn't want to pay taxes. You can see in August of 1788, a urban worker would have to spend 50% of whatever they made on bread. And then by July of 89, they had to pay 75% of whatever they made went towards food, which that is a crazy amount. And so you can see why the country was ripe for a revolution. Okay, then talking course of the revolution, because it's very different from the American Revolution when we think of just this war that's being fought. So when does it actually start? People can debate that, but we've said we definitely know it's 1789, but what's the official event? I don't know. But one of them is the signing of the tennis court oath. This is made by the Third Estate. Some First Estate members join. And what they do, you can see them there, they're making an oath. They all have their hands up, and they're meeting in an indoor tennis court. And the reason is, so they had King Louis called together a meeting of the Estates General. And we know, okay, that's the legislative body, and that's where there's representatives from each of the estates. And basically he makes the Third Estate super mad, saying, okay, each estate gets one vote. Like, wait, what? We're 97% of the population and we get one vote. And because they're voting on tax reform. And so then the Third Estate finally takes power into their own hands. They meet in this tennis court and they say, hey, we're not going to leave until we form a new government. And so they do. And this new government is called the National Assembly. What's interesting is that this is a constitutional monarchy. So they don't get rid of the king right away. That's crazy radical, even though that is what the Americans do. They say, okay, we're still going to have a king. We're just going to limit his powers a bunch. So you could say that is the start of the revolution. They form a new government. Or you could say July 14, 1789 is the start of the revolution. And this is Bastille Day. This is France celebrates this just like we celebrate the 4th of July. They celebrate in a very similar way on July 14 instead of 4. And they're celebrating Bastille Day, the day that people took power into their own hands. And so the storming of the Bastille. So the Bastille is this political prison. And it says radicals took control of the political prison, took the gunpowder that was stored there. This is when they cut the prison guards' heads off and put them on spikes. And this is really important. I'm not just sharing this like weird detail with you, but it foreshadows the violent and radical nature of mob rule, because we're going to see mobs get crazy out of control. We're going to see this revolution turn super violent. Yeah, so it's going to look very different from other revolutions where they like can't control the people. And it starts here where it's with the storming of the Bastille. The reason that they did that is there was just this rumor that the king was hiring foreign guards and was going to try to end the National Assembly, which is kind of true. He did hire foreign guards, but it's because he was afraid that he was going to be killed, which he should have feared because he was killed. But then we see, okay, rumors flying, and yeah, there wasn't actually, he wasn't trying to declare war there. Some other things in the course of the revolution, France goes to wars against other monarchies in Europe. And so we see some of their enemies. So Austria and Prussia first. So Austria, we know the queen, Marie Antoinette is from Austria. So King Louis and Marie try to flee to Austria, and they are captured on their way. And so they never make it there. But so they go to war against Austria, Prussia, Russia, Great Britain, Holy Roman Empire. We'll talk in a little bit about how Napoleon takes over any kind of, that's how he's able to rise to power, is the fact that they're at war with the rest of Europe. And so it starts in 1792, and they keep fighting against the rest of Europe until Napoleon's defeat in 1815. You can see there on the map who they're fighting against. So you see there the Empire of France. You see the states under Napoleon's control. So he's going to take over Spain. He's going to take over, see the Confederation of the Rhine, the Kingdom of Italy, the Kingdom of Naples, Grand Duchy of Warsaw. So that's part of the Holy Roman Empire. And then you see the states that didn't fall to him, that he was fighting against, though, like Great Britain and Russia. And then states allied with Napoleon, the Austrians actually allied themselves, and the Prussians as well. So that's crazy that he was going to try to take over all of Europe. And that's all then, you could say, a part of this revolution. He takes over in 1799. So that's 10 years after that started. Another major part of the course of the revolution is the Reign of Terror from 93 to 94. How this starts is with the beheading of the king and ends with the beheading of Robespierre. And so it's easy to talk in history and be like, oh yeah, they cut the king's head off. But can you even imagine if in America, they were to decide, the government was to decide, okay, we think our former president or our current president is committing treason. And so we are going to kill him publicly and like hold his head up. Like, wouldn't you be terrified if that happened? But that's exactly what happens. They accuse him of treason since he was trying to flee to Austria, and kill him publicly. With the guillotine. The guillotine was seen as this way, this equal way to die. So they kill him, and then this lasts for like over a year. It says 25 to 40,000 people. We don't know the exact numbers, but we do know that most of the people were actually in the Third Estate. It wasn't like they were killing off all the nobility. It was anyone who was considered an enemy of the revolution. And so a lot of people took advantage of this and were having their enemies killed. And there are a lot of false accusations. And we see the danger of mob rule here. It doesn't end until Robespierre is killed. He's the one who was the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, and he was the one leading this charge. There was a radical government in place at this time, and he was one of the major leaders. And so in the end, the other leaders finally are able to talk together and like, okay, we have to get rid of Robespierre. And so when they finally get rid of him, then the Reign of Terror stops. Also during the course of the revolution, there's 5 new governments. You do not need to remember the names of all of them. That is a lot, but you do need to know that there's these major changes in government, and it's continually happening. So yes, it starts with the National Assembly, and then they write a new constitution. Within that, they are the ones who write the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which you're going to take a look at in a moment with a partner. And then that's replaced by the Legislative Assembly, which is they're going to reform the National Assembly, and then we're going to have the National Convention, which is super radical. That one is going to be the one that actually feels like they're enemies of the church. And so they're going to change the calendar to try to get rid of Sundays and make it a 10-day week where there is no Sunday, trying to get rid of any influence of the church, any influence of religion. Which a lot of people didn't like because they were very religious and didn't want that. But so that's the National Convention, and then they're replaced by a more moderate one, the Directory, and the Directory is the one that's overthrown by Napoleon. You can say coup d'etat, which means blow to the state, which is the sudden takeover when he takes over in 1799. Okay. And then the last part here of the course of the revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte leads a coup takes over as emperor in 1799 and rules until 1815 when the rest of Europe is going to exile him. So here you see him, a picture of him where he looks like a king. And it's just crazy that they fought this big revolution to get rid of the king, killed their king. And then here comes another king who takes over, and the people like him and are okay with it because he does meet some of the goals of the revolution. And so the Napoleonic Code, which he didn't totally right, he's just the one who gets it passed, is this legal code, which is going to influence a lot of Europe, a lot of Latin America as well, on what legal systems are like. I want to point out some ironies though. So the three main goals of the revolution that they kind of outlined later are liberty, equality, fraternity. So liberty, okay, wanting freedom. And so yes, he ends serfdom. However, this Napoleonic Code brings back slavery in the French colonies. So there's a great hypocrisy. So equality, same laws for all men. This is revolutionary for that time, but not for women. They actually lost some rights with the Napoleonic Code, that it made it very clear that no men are the leaders of the household. And so women lost some rights in this. I had mentioned earlier about Olympe de Gouges, who wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women, and she was actually killed during the Reign of Terror. Women do not get more rights during the French Revolution, which is a great irony. Fraternity means brotherhood. Okay, if you think of like a frat, a fraternity, okay, and so they're looking for this brotherhood, and they get that by ending the ancient regime or the old regime, and so that there's no formal nobility. But even though there's no formal nobility, France is still a monarchy. Starting even in 1815. Okay, so those are all things course of the revolution. What you're going to do now with a partner, two different things. So first, I want you guys to talk about the effects of the revolution and go through SPICE, except you don't have to do the I. So think, okay, what are the social effects? How does this affect the social structure? So maybe social classes, how does it impact women? Political. What's the political impact? What's the political impact of Napoleon trying to take over all of Europe? The political impact of the Napoleonic Code, or actually Napoleonic Code, I would put that under cultural because we said legal systems is cultural. So yeah, what's the effect of the Napoleonic Code? What's the effect on church? I think concordant, was that one of your flashcards? I think it was this agreement between the church and Napoleon. And then economic, what is the economic impact of the revolution? Once you have done that with your partner, then you can read, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but then you can go ahead and read the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, at least parts of it, and answer with your partner those questions. And that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your Monday, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.